I'm here with Bill Stanczykiewicz, President and CEO of the Indiana Youth Institute. And first of all, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Time out. I know your organization likes to feature or highlight a particular issue each month. And this month you're focusing on poverty and inequality of opportunity. And that's based, I believe, on a study that came out recently involving some Harvard researchers. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, Sarah, this is the 50th anniversary of when President Johnson declared the war on poverty. So the topics of poverty and inequality have been in the news a little bit more than usual here, whether it's discussions in the U.S. Congress or in the state legislatures of Indiana, Michigan, and Illinois. And the Harvard folks have come out with this study that has two really interesting findings. One is they ask, is America still the land of opportunity? Can a child move up the economic ladder? And the good news is, after looking at data of 40 million children over more than 2 decades, the answer to that question is yes. And we don't hear that too much on the heels of the Great Recession here in the last several years.
Right.
But then the other finding is also important. It depends where you're raised. It depends on the community where you are born and where you grow up. And there are some factors that can increase the likelihood that a child will move up the economic ladder, and those same factors, if not present, can also prevent a child from succeeding economically into adulthood. So looking at those factors, looking at the region where you live, will determine the prospects of a child being successful economically as an adult.
And we'll touch on those factors in a second, but first, as you mentioned, the data varied by region. So how did our region do? How did Indiana fare in these statistics?
So the Harvard folks developed the country into 741 regions. Each region has multiple counties. So when we refer to a city, it's actually kind of one of the main cities in a multi-county region. 17 of these regions are in the state of Indiana. Importantly, 12 of our 17 regions are below the national median, including the region that includes Northwest Indiana. So that shows us that in Indiana, compared to the rest of the country, most of our regions do not fare very well.
And so overall, again, to kind of summarize, that means that a child born into a lower income family or situation has a more difficult time reaching those higher income brackets or financial sort of status, correct?
The Harvard people found out that the prospects of economic mobility in America are at least as strong as they were more than 40 years ago back in 1971, and in fact probably are stronger, which is remarkable because the rich truly are richer and the gaps between rich and poor are larger than they were 40 years ago, and yet economic mobility is still possible. However, the Harvard people found it depends on the community where the child is born and raised. And if they're not getting supports at home, in the community, and through schooling, their prospects for economic advancement are much less as they grow up.
Now, as we touched on, there are several factors that they identified as part of this, and I think it's helpful that instead of just pointing out a problem, they said, here's a problem and here's some areas that we can look at to start to address that. And there were, I believe, 5 factors that they identified. Can you talk a little bit about those?
They look at 6 total, although 2 are related as it comes with education. And the good news is, yes, they give us these factors and also actions we can take in our homes, in our communities, in our schools, that we don't need to wait for a change in law or some change in an economic trend, things we can get working on today. Now, one of the big factors is segregation. And not so much we hear the word segregation, we think by race, and that's important, but the Harvard folks really look at segregation by income, that when you have a region with a high percentage of low-income neighbors living in close proximity, that is a region very likely that does not have easy access to quality public services, does not have access, importantly, Sarah, to the information that's needed on what it takes to be successful and to get ahead and to be employed and to be self-sufficient, and that the children in those communities often do not see work modeled, do not see economic success modeled, and therefore that calls for the need for mentors and role models to walk alongside those children. It calls for the need to work with the community organizations in those neighborhoods. These are the organizations that people know and that people trust and that can help them get the information that they need, and obviously the ongoing efforts to improve and enhance public services. So economic segregation is huge. A familiar topic is teen pregnancy. In a community with high percentages of teen pregnancy, those moms and those children, first of all, are 5 to 6 times more likely to live in poverty, and it makes it much more difficult for them to move on from poverty. Thirdly is community engagement, what the Harvard people call in a fancy way social capital. And what this means is communities where people are involved. They volunteer at the neighborhood association, civic organizations, community groups, religious congregations, and where people are involved out in their community, children tend to do better in all sorts of ways, including improving their prospects for economic mobility. The two that are related in schooling, getting a good quality K through 12 education, but then importantly, and this has been a strong drum we've been beating in Indiana, the need for education after high school. The high school diploma no longer is enough. You need the 1-year credential, the 2-year associate's degree, or the 4-year bachelor's degree. And if we can get that word out to our kids and get them on that pathway, they're most likely to succeed economically. And then sixth, we have economic segregation, teen pregnancy, community engagement, K through 12 education, post-secondary education. But then the greatest factor are communities with high percentages of single-parent homes. This could be a difficult topic to discuss. It's almost always mom raising the children, and this is not being critical of mom. In fact, it's dad who is AWOL more often than not. What we do know for these children, they are much more likely to live in poverty, and it's much more difficult for them to raise up the economic ladder and leave that situation of poverty.
And I know the study pointed out that even children in areas with a high concentration of single parents, if a child is from a home with 2 married parents, even they are affected by that sort of community of family structure that's maybe a little less intact.
Yeah, a couple things. The Harvard folks point out that family structure is the largest influence on economic mobility, but with all 6 of the factors, they look at not just an individual family, but the propensity of a region to have any of those factors. So if you have a community with a lot of teen parents, if you have a community with a lot of youth who are not succeeding in K through 12 education, if you have a community with a lot of single parent households, that's when the prospects for economic mobility diminish significantly.
And I think we may see a little of that in the statistics for Indiana. As we were mentioning before, there are greater chances for children raised in a family that's in a lower income situation. There's greater opportunity for them to move into a higher income situation later in sort of more rural areas. Urban areas, it's actually a little bit more difficult to move up that ladder.
Well, and it's most true in our state's capital city. And this is in some ways counterintuitive. In the 50 largest metropolitan regions in this study, Indianapolis ranked 5th worst. And Indianapolis, again, it's not just Marion, but it's also surrounding counties. Now, at the Indiana Youth Institute, we work all over the state. We're very careful to be in all 92 counties and not just be about the capital city. And as we travel the state, people tell us, oh, Indianapolis, you get the stadium and you get the canal, and people are moving to Indianapolis for the jobs. And in fact, we see our capital city's population is increasing. That region is increasing. But what the Harvard people say, it's not where the jobs are that you move to. It is the conditions that a child is in where they are born and raised. And when you look at the data for those counties in the Indianapolis community, the Indianapolis region, they don't fare as well in those areas of teen pregnancy and school success and single parent homes and so forth. Again, Indiana has 17 regions. In this study, only 5 are above the national median, and all 5 of them are more small-town, rural communities. The other 12, including Northwest Indiana, are below the national median. That's the challenge. The good news is, remember, the Harvard people said, economic opportunity is still alive and well in the United States. And here are these 6 factors that you don't need a change in law. You don't need a change in an economic trend. We can work on these family, community, and school issues now, each of us in our local communities, to increase the economic prospects of our children. It's not easy. If it were easy, we would have done it already. But they give us a good roadmap on the steps we can take.